Federal judge in Seattle hearing the first arguments in this multi-state lawsuit that aims to block President Trump's order to end birthright citizenship. Maybe you've read about this in the news over the course of the last couple of days. 22 states, a number of immigrant rights groups have signed on to this lawsuit. AG Keith Ellison here in Minnesota involved in this as well. So Donald Trump's order would end guaranteed U.S. citizenship for those born in this country, regardless of the parent's citizenship status. The birthright citizenship guarantee is written into the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. We'll see how this plays out, but today that is being heard. Okay, so that kind of leads us into our next segment here. You know, we've been talking about a lot of changes in what immigration will look like after President Trump did sign several executive orders this week. There are obviously things that we know for sure, but there's a lot more that we don't know. So we kind of wanted to slow things down a little bit and really take a look at what's actually happening in real time. So joining me now is Rosanna Berardi, an immigration law attorney in Buffalo, New York. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And just to let our audience know, you know, one of the things going into choosing someone for this interview was really to keep this sort of as apolitical as possible, right? Which is hard to do, but we just really want to try and lay out the facts of what we know and what we don't know. So, Rosanna, I'll just start with, you know, what is it that we know about how immigration landscape is really changing, you know, right now, today?
So a lot of things are happening since Monday. This is my 28th year being an immigration lawyer, and we've seen a series of executive orders that are really attempting to change the U.S. immigration law. And whether you are Democrat, Republican, in the middle, executive orders really are dangerous, and this is really the role of Congress. But I think what we're seeing is a frustration. Congress hasn't changed the immigration law since 1996. And I feel like this is really catapulting it to the forefront. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about it, and hopefully we'll see some actual congressional legislation.
Yeah, and when you say that, you know, we can think back to President Biden and the executive orders around forgiving student loans and how that was put forth, and there was a lot of criticism and then ended up going through the court. So you're right, we do see it, you know, on both sides here. This one, though, top of mind for a lot of people, as you know, you just have to turn on any news and you'll see there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of fear, but you know, what do we know for sure about specifically what President Trump wants to do, you know, at the southern border and then also within U.S. cities?
So definitely we're seeing a very aggressive position on U.S. immigration law. And just remember that, you know, a lot of these acts and executive orders are really based on polls. You know, this is not done single-handedly. The president and the administration, a lot of the campaign trail was all about immigration. The New York Times had an interesting poll this morning on how Americans feel about immigration. So we know that we're going to see a more aggressive push. We're going to see a tighter border. We're not going to see, you know, hundreds of thousands of migrants walking across the border. The message is loud and clear that the Trump administration definitely wants to focus on legal immigration and close the border, close the gaps, get all kinds of law enforcement agencies involved in really cracking down on the unlawful entries to the United States.
And Rosanna, I'm just going to put you on the spot here. Do you happen to remember off the top of your head or have the information from that New York Times poll? I'm curious what they found in general terms.
Yeah, so the New York Times poll was actually quoting Axios, and it was basically something to the effect that Americans don't want a full swoop of deportation, but rather they want people out of the United States that don't belong here, that may have final orders of removal or deportation. So that poll was really interesting because it did show the temperature of the average American with respect to immigration, saying something's got to be done. But it seemed a bit more moderate and centrist than what we're seeing right now at the Trump administration.
And that kind of leads me to my next question for you, which is really how this might play out in cities, because we happened to do a story last night where our mayor of Minneapolis and the police chief of Minneapolis both kind of said, hey, you know, this is kind of hands off for us. We have no role in federal enforcement, but we know that the Justice Department has said that it will target state and local officials who do not comply. So obviously we've got a rub there. How do you see this without speculating, because we're trying not to do that here, which is really hard. How do you see that kind of playing out?
So a memo came out on Tuesday, and I read it very closely. And boy, does it say to all U.S. attorneys, hey, listen, guys, if there are state, local, municipality officials that are refusing to comply with federal directives, we want them to be prosecuted. And we've seen this before with the sanctuary city concept. And Minneapolis is certainly a sanctuary city, has been one for over 20 years. And basically what that means is, the state and local authorities don't want to get involved in immigration. But this memo on Tuesday from the Trump administration and the DOJ says, too bad, so sad. The supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution says the federal government is going to tell you what to do, and failure to do so, you're going to wind up being prosecuted. So we haven't seen this before. We have seen the tension with sanctuary cities. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court in the Biden administration, but it was dismissed. And there was the whole play on, what really is the role? Is the supremacy clause appropriate here, saying you must enforce and enact federal laws on the local level? This one's going to be challenged. We're probably going to see it go up to a lot of high courts, whether it's Supreme Court or not. The Trump administration said loudly and clearly on Tuesday, everybody's got to be on board. We don't care about the sanctuary city status, which really isn't anything regulatory or legal. It was a concept that was made up many years ago. So this one's going to be super interesting to watch.
And so my last question to you as we wrap up here is, time-wise, if we're talking about, challenges and courts and things, should people expect to see things happening on the ground relatively soon, or do you really feel like a lot of this is going to take a while to play out?
Well, based on everything I'm reading in terms of the executive orders, the pending litigation, the Trump administration really wants to go gangbusters on this immediately. Now, we've seen some of the things stopped in their tracks, like the birthright citizenship termination. We've got all the states and the ACLU litigating against it. So I think we're going to see pieces of this in dribs and drabs, but they really are trying to do a comprehensive effort. But we're going to have to see. Remember, we're 3 branches of government, and we have checks and balances. And boy, are we going to see those 3 levels interact like we never have before. But the message is loud and clear. And that might simply be it. They are really saying, don't cross the U.S. border if you are here unlawfully or plan to do that. And that will have a chilling effect. It always does. It did the first time around during the Trump administration, and we'll probably see it again here.
Yeah. All right, Rosanna Berardi, we really appreciate your time today and trying to help us
My
understand the facts of all of this. Thank you.